Not long after the death of Empress Dowager Cixi, the imperial family vacated her spectacular garden, the Summer Palace. And yet, they still had to pay for its maintenance. How did they do it? And what would the arrival of the People's Liberation Army in early 1949 mean for the Summer Palace and for the city of Beijing? To find the answers, watch episode 10 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
The Qing government saw the 1904 World Fair as an opportunity to raise China's profile internationally. To this end, a portrait of Empress Dowager Cixi painted by the American Catherine Carl was exhibited. But while China was being lauded in St. Louis, the Qing Empire was in its dying days. On the 24th day of the 7th lunar month of 1908, Emperor Guangxu celebrated his birthday at the Summer Palace. For the occasion, the Emperor and Empress Dowager Cixi went to a performance of opera in the Garden of Virtue and Harmony. Three months later, on the 12th of the 10th lunar month, Emperor Guangxu and Empress Dowager Cixi received a British delegation in Renshou Hall. It would be the last political event hosted by the Qing government in the Summer Palace. A week later, Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu left the Summer Palace and travelled to Zhongnanhai. Neither of them would ever return to the Summer Palace. On the 14th day of the 11th lunar month that year, 1908, Emperor Guangxu died at the age of just 38. And the following day, 74-year-old Empress Dowager Cixi also passed away. Aisinjoro Pui, at the age of 3, became the last emperor of the Qing dynasty. On the 19th day of the 12th lunar month of 1908, Empress Dowager Longyu issued an edict. It stated, "The emperor is too young to visit the Summer Palace." And with that, the Qing imperial family declared an end to their time at the Summer Palace. To outsiders, the Summer Palace remained a place of mystery. Curiosity was rife, and wild stories about Empress Dowager Cixi and the last imperial garden were passed from mouth to mouth. It's 6 o'clock in the morning and a new day is beginning at the Summer Palace. The East Palace Gate is the front entrance to the Summer Palace. Each of the gate's 6 vermilion door panels are decorated with 81 gold-plated round nails arranged in 9 rows. Above the gate hangs a board with an inscription written in Emperor Guangxu's calligraphic style. It reads simply, Summer Palace. In front of the gate there's a stone terrace with 2 carved dragons playing with a pearl. The carvings, made during the reign of Emperor Qianlong, were moved here in 1937 from Yuan Mingyuan. The dragon was, of course, the symbol of the emperor, and so, in the past, only emperors and empresses were permitted to pass through this middle gate. Today, however, thousands of tourists visit the Summer Palace every day, entering through this same gate. The garden has survived for more than 200 years, ever since its earliest incarnation as Qingyi Yuan, the Garden of Clear Ripples. However, only for the past 80 years have commoners been permitted inside.
Not long after the death of Empress Dowager Cixi, the imperial family vacated her spectacular garden, the Summer Palace. And yet, they still had to pay for its maintenance. How did they do it? And what would the arrival of the People's Liberation Army in early 1949 mean for the Summer Palace and for the city of Beijing? To find the answers, watch episode 10 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
In 1924, Emperor Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, was still living in the Forbidden City, despite having abdicated. At the beginning of that year, he made a sudden announcement. He and the Empress would visit the Summer Palace. His decision caused consternation in the office of the imperial household. In 1908, when 3-year-old Puyi was enthroned as emperor, Empress Dowager Longyu had issued an edict that the emperor would not be visiting the Summer Palace. Subsequently, its buildings had been sealed off. The garden had lain waste ever since, and only a handful of foreigners and high officials had actually been inside. Emperor Puyi had been removed from the throne in the Revolution of 1911, but the privileges granted to the imperial family by the Republican government meant he was still acknowledged as the master of the Forbidden City and the Summer Palace. On April the 24th, 1913, a first group of aristocrats and high officials were permitted to visit the Summer Palace. They and subsequent visitors had to apply for permission to the office of the imperial household in advance. The open days were the 6th, 16th and 26th days of each month by the lunar calendar, as well as every Sunday. These visits to the Summer Palace were referred to as paying tribute to the Summer Palace. Initially, restrictions were imposed on visitor numbers, and women were not allowed into the garden at all. But following strong protests, women were finally permitted to visit on the 6th day of each lunar month. On May the 6th, 1914, the Summer Palace was opened to the public. Anyone could enter in exchange for the price of a ticket. Although nominally master of the Summer Palace, Emperor Puyi didn't visit the palace until 1924, when he was 19. It was, in fact, the first time he had been beyond the Peking city gate. Puyi, accompanied by his British tutor Sir Reginald Fleming Johnston, entered the garden through the East Palace Gate. It was Johnston who had proposed the visit, and the following day he was appointed Chief Steward of the Summer Palace. The garden's beautiful scenery and delicate architecture charmed Puyi. As Johnston recalled in his memoirs, the Emperor was delighted. He saw the environs and the Summer Palace for the first time, and contrary to his expectations, the garden itself had not been destroyed. Johnston ordered 3 modern pleasure boats for Puyi. The staff of the Summer Palace were astonished when they saw the first of these boats, the Aria. Johnston recalled they had never seen such a boat, and when the Emperor, instead of a boatman, strenuously steered the boat with an oar, the staff went into a panic. However, before the third of the pleasure boats ordered for Puyi had arrived, there had been an abrupt change in his circumstances. On November the 5th, 1924, troops led by General Feng Yuxiang ordered Puyi and his small court out of the Forbidden City. And with that, Puyi also lost control of the Summer Palace. The buildings and facilities at the Summer Palace were sealed. This was done on the orders of the Committee for Handling the Remaining Problems Concerning the Qing Imperial Family, an organization established by the national government. But 2 years later, Wang Huaixing, commander of the Peking garrison, having been handsomely rewarded by the emperor, secretly handed back the Summer Palace to the Qing Imperial family. In 1925, a professor from Peking University, after a visit to the Summer Palace with his 2 daughters, wrote the following in his diary. May 15, Thursday, sunny and cloudy. The 3rd and 4th daughters and I took a bus and visited the Summer Palace. 1.2 silver dollars for admission, half a silver dollar for admission to Pai Yundian, the Hall of Dispelling Clouds, 0.2 silver dollars for the Garden of Harmonious Interest, and 0.1 silver dollars for a map of the Summer Palace. Boats are on the lake. Taking one costs 3 to 5 silver dollars. The diary also tells us what the family saw in the Summer Palace that day. The furniture has been confiscated. Only wooden containers for vases can be seen on tables that are covered by dust inches thick. The doors are sealed. We could only see the magnificent buildings. In those days, admission tickets for the Summer Palace were issued in triplicate. One copy was for the ticket office, and the other 2 were for entering and exiting the garden. The ticket cost 1.4 silver dollars, the same price as a 20-kilogram sack of flour. A third of the revenue from ticket sales went to the military headquarters. The rest went to the office of the imperial household. The reason why the public was being allowed into the Summer Palace was simple: to raise funds. The imperial court was unable to cover the cost of maintaining it. Since the death of Empress Dowager Cixi, the annual budget for maintaining the Summer Palace had been slashed from 150,000 taels of silver to 50,000, but even raising this much smaller sum was proving difficult. In 1921, Puyi received a demand for the payment of 250,000 taels of silver in arrears from 30 carpenters' workshops that had been refurbishing the Summer Palace. The imperial family was able to pay less than half of this sum. The fact was that even with income from visitors, the imperial court could still not cover the daily costs of the garden, and gradually the buildings were falling into a state of disrepair.
Not long after the death of Empress Dowager Cixi, the imperial family vacated her spectacular garden, the Summer Palace. And yet, they still had to pay for its maintenance. How did they do it? And what would the arrival of the People's Liberation Army in early 1949 mean for the Summer Palace and for the city of Beijing? To find the answers, watch episode 10 of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.
On July 1st, 1928, the civil ministry under the national government took over the Summer Palace and turned it into a national park. By this time, however, the Summer Palace was in a very bad state indeed. As a way of raising funds for its maintenance, many of its buildings were rented out. Parts of the Hall of Happiness and Longevity and 16 other buildings were rented out as first-class residences. Parts of the Hall of Knowing Spring and 21 other buildings were rented out as second-class houses. And the Chamber of Joyful Farming, the House of Eternal Longevity and the Chamber of Peace were made available as third-class residences. The area known as Strolling Through a Picture Scroll in the middle of the western side of Longevity Hill is not only one of the most beautiful parts of the Summer Palace, but also commands a fine panoramic view. In front of it, there's a two-story house with two other houses, one on each side. The house on the east side is known as Lovely Hill, and that on the west, Borrowed Autumn. To the rear is the Pavilion of Clear Brilliance. All the buildings are linked by corridors. Viewed from here, Lake Kunming, with its waters merging into the horizon, appears truly vast. Seen from the lake, Strolling Through a Picture Scroll is covered in foliage. Against this beautiful backdrop, people look as if they're parts of a painting. In 1932, Strolling Through a Picture Scroll was rented by Ni Daojie, the son of a warlord. The buildings were in such a poor condition that Ni had to pay for them to be restored. The Chamber of Crystal Splendor was for a long time rented by Yuan Keding, the eldest son of the warlord Yuan Shikai. Originally the site of the Arhat Hall and the Temple of Immense Gratitude and Longevity, it had been rebuilt as the Chamber of Crystal Splendor when Empress Dowager Cixi had the Summer Palace renovated. In the courtyard was an octagonal pool in the shape of lotus petals. The water in this pond was known as 8 Virtue Water, a reference to the water with 8 benefits in Buddhist sutras. Yuan Keding lived here for more than 10 years. He finally left on the eve of the founding of the People's Republic of China. To raise yet more money, Nanhu Island was leased to a restaurant. The same restaurant also rented the Pavilion of Buddhist Fragrance. Even a fishing company was established in the grounds of the Summer Palace. Fish were caught from Lake Kunming and then sold. Huge bronze vats stood in front of a number of halls and chambers in the Summer Palace. These had been filled with water to use in the event of a fire. At midnight on July the 15th, 1945, stealthy activity could be seen in front of the Hall of Dispelling Clouds. Summer Palace staff were scratching the gold from the surface of 3 of the giant bronze vats. The Summer Palace had been occupied by Japanese troops since 1937, and they were planning to ship the vats back to Japan where they would be melted down to make weapons. The workers secretly scraped off the gold and then melted it down into 3 ingots weighing 2½ taels. These ingots were then secretly handed over to the mayor of Beiping. "20 days later, the 6 bronze vats, a bronze table, 4 bronze incense burners and 19 bronze stoves were transported to Tianjin by Japanese soldiers. However, before the bronzes could leave port, Japan surrendered and the historical relics were returned to the Summer Palace. Just 3 years after the Japanese were expelled, the Summer Palace was once again under threat from fighting. In December 1948, Kuomintang troops took over the Summer Palace. Resolved to fight to the death against the People's Liberation Army, they dug trenches on the rear hill and outside the North Palace Gate. On December the 12th, a PLA force reached the Bridge of Ease and Peace, just a few hundred meters from the North Palace Gate. The two sides were within gunfire range of each other. But in the end, there was no fighting. This was because Liang Sicheng, an architect commissioned by the Central Committee of the Communist Party, had drawn up a list of the most valuable relics in the city and their exact locations, and then an order to protect them had been issued to the commanders of all fighting units. So the PLA force made a detour and entered downtown Beiping from Shijingshan. The Kuomintang troops stayed for a night in the Summer Palace and then retreated. Thus, the Summer Palace was unscathed. On the front of Longevity Hill on the east side stands Jingfu Pavilion. At the time when the Summer Palace was known as Qingyuan, the Garden of Clear Ripples, the 2-story Tanhua Pavilion had stood there, but it was burnt down in 1860 by the Anglo-French Allied force. Jingfu Pavilion was built on the site when Empress Dowager Cixi had the Summer Palace renovated. On January the 29th, 1949, a joint PLA-Kuomintang military office was set up in the pavilion, and it was there that the procedures for handing over Beiping were decided upon. 2 days later, Beiping was peacefully liberated. Ye Jianying, the PLA representative, was the director of the joint office. He lived for a while in the nearby Hall of Longevity. This building had an ornamented gate, and its main hall and 2 side chambers were linked by corridors. Built during the reign of Emperor Guangxu, it had served previously as a pharmacy. On the morning of March the 25th, 1949, the Hall of Longevity welcomed some special guests who had come to Beiping from Xibaipo. They were Mao Zedong, Zhu De, Liu Shaoqi, Zhou Enlai, and Ren Bishi, leaders of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and of the PLA headquarters. They rested at the hall for a while and then in the afternoon went to Shijiao Airport. There, they attended a military parade prior to their entry into Beiping. The Summer Palace was about to enter a new era. The magnificent buildings in the Summer Palace were by this time in a state of decay, and the gardens lay waste. When the PLA took over, the Summer Palace account showed cash in hand of just 2,027 yuan, equivalent today to just 0.2 renminbi. At the beginning of 1949, the government of northern China initiated a comprehensive investigation of the Summer Palace and subsequently began renovation work. Even though the entire country was being rebuilt and finances were tight, local governments managed to donate money so that the Summer Palace could be restored.
Ever since its earlier incarnation as the Garden of Clear Ripples, the Summer Palace has been the setting for many important events, some personal, some of national and international importance. Following the founding of New China in 1949, the Summer Palace underwent major repairs. What new stories did the renovation uncover? To find out, please watch the 11th and final part of Untold Stories from the Summer Palace.